Welcome to the Black Writer Studio, a podcast presented by the Hurston Wright Foundation and hosted by Dr. Khadijah Ali Coleman. The Black Writer Studio is dedicated to showcasing Black writers who are transforming the world today with their literary pen and creating a legacy for the culture. Toni Ann Johnson is the winner of the 2021 Flannery O'Connor Award for short fiction with her linked collection, Light Skin Gone to Waste, selected by Roxane Gay. Johnson's novella, Homegoing, was a semi-finalist for the William Faulkner Wisdom Award in fiction. It won Accents Publishing's inaugural novella contest in 2020 and was released in May of 2021. The novel, Remedy for a Broken Angel, was released in 2014 and earned Johnson a 2015 NAACP Image Award nomination for Outstanding Literary Work by a Debut Author. In 1998, Johnson won the Christopher Award for her Disney screenplay Ruby Bridges, and in 2004 she won a second Humanitas prize for her Showtime screenplay Crown Heights. In 2000, Johnson wrote the Lifetime movie The Courage to Love, starring Vanessa L. Williams, based on the life of Henriette Delille, a free woman of color in mid-19th century New Orleans, who became one of the first nuns of African descent. In 2002, she wrote the television pilot Save the Last Dance, produced for Fox Television and based on the hit feature film on which she was a participating writer. Johnson also co-wrote the 2008 feature Step Up 2, The Streets, the second installment of the international Step Up franchise. Johnson holds a BFA in drama from New York University's Tisch School of the Arts and an MFA in creative writing from Antioch University, Los Angeles. She's an alumna of the Sundance Screenwriters Lab and the Prague Summer Program for Writers. So I am so happy to have you with us, Toni Ann Johnson, for our second season of Black Writers Studio, because when I even envisioned this podcast, I hoped to have not only speak with novelists, but multidisciplinary artists such as yourself, who you just have so many, your resume is extensive and it's just so impressive. But one of the things that really stood out for me was that you are the screenwriter for Ruby Bridges, for the Ruby Bridges story. And for those of us who saw it, who know the story, the Ruby Bridges story always amazes me because you see it and you have this idea that she's an elder or she's passed on. But the reality is that she just barely left being middle-aged, and so I guess we can jump in there with.
Sure. And first, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being here.
Well, look, I just got down to business because I don't want you to leave. I have so many questions, but you're so very welcome. I'm so glad that that you are here and to be able to talk to you and to know that you have a relationship with Hurston Wright, being one of our recent fellows from 2021, being able to work with the wonderful Crystal Wilkerson.
Which was phenomenal, amazing. She was amazing.
She is. She's amazing. And she herself has a long history with Hurston Wright from the early days when Marita Golden co-founded the organization. So to know that writers such as yourself and Crystal are still attached to us, and that you, someone who has such an extensive resume and experience writing and publishing, to see and to know that you still work on your craft.
Absolutely.
And you still see,
improve.
Right.
There's always more to learn.
Yeah. And you still are in fellowship with other writers. So I am fangirling and asking for you to jump in with Ruby Bridges. But I know that's going to come up in your story. I actually would like to know just a little bit about your your writing journey where you decided that you were going to engage in all of these different modalities. That's what I like to call them.
Well, I started out as an actor very young. I started at the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute when I was 14. And I'm not going to tell my age, but Lee Strasberg was still alive when I started studying. And I did the Young People's Program for 3 years. And then I skipped a grade of high school, graduated early, got into NYU, and I remained at the Strasberg Theater Institute to get my BFA in drama through NYU.
Okay.
And so I had the opportunity to have seminars with Lee and really learn about what it was to be an artist. So Lee would say art is in the choice, and I learned about specificity. And then I studied with Stella Adler. I took script interpretation. And so I learned a lot about the modernist playwrights, and she was teaching us about how these playwrights were writing stories about people, but set in their political time and dealing with the issues that were coming up in their culture. And so that really stuck with me. And so I took that, when I transitioned from acting, started moving into playwriting, I brought that with me. And so that's kind of how I began as a playwright. And so one of my first plays was a piece called Gramercy Park is Closed to the Public. And for those who don't know, Gramercy Park is a very exclusive neighborhood in New York City. And I, at the time, was living just up the street from it. And there's a park that's gated, and you have to have a key in order to enter it. Wow. And I used to walk around this park every day for exercise. And after a while, it occurred to me, like, I'm always on the outside. I can't get into this place. And it started to become a metaphor for me for the haves and the have-nots. And the have-nots were on the outside of the gate looking in. And I developed this play about a biracial woman who grew up in that community, but because of racism had issues, even being part of that well-to-do community. People thought she didn't belong, thought her Black father didn't belong. And so that was kind of the beginning and I acted in it. So I took, I went from being an actor and I was in that play. It was done in a number of places in New York. The Ensemble Studio Theater did a staged reading. And then it was eventually done at Vassar College through the New York Stage and Film Company. And I did not get to play the part. Nicole Ari Parker played the lead role. And that was in 1999. And that play was what launched my screenwriting career.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And my first movie to be produced was Ruby Bridges.
Really?
Yeah.
And it was still along the same lines of this politicized experience that this baby girl was, had to really go through as a symbol. So
yes. And it was
can you tell us
class also, race and class. So it was like that school was in a working class environment. Those white people who didn't want her in the school were sort of threatened because they weren't well-to-do and wealthy. They didn't have the option to say no or to, put their kids in other schools. It was harder for them because they weren't well-to-do, but also because they were just, sort of at the bottom rung of the ladder. They did not want, Black people encroaching on what they thought was their status, but they didn't really have status. And then what you also see in that film is that there's an upper middle class Black family. The couple, the doctor from the NAACP who first meets her mother and welcomes them into this and says Ruby has won this opportunity. They are from the upper class, or at least the upper middle class, and they're of color. Mm-hmm. And so that was really important to me. And I had wanted to explore that more because I thought that was really interesting. But, Disney being what it is and the main producers being white, that wasn't of interest to them.
Right.
But those class dynamics are really interesting to me, and that's something that I deal with in my present work. In the book that I have coming out now, Light Skin Gone to Waste, is based on my family, which was upper middle class, but we were living in a mostly working class white town. But I felt that I was marginalized and second class because socially I couldn't be in the top percent of kids. I didn't feel like I would ever be able to be one of the cool kids or the popular kids because I wasn't white. And I also received some racist treatment from parents of friends who assumed because I was a person of color that my family was associated with what they thought Black people were. Criminals, poor. My father had a PhD in psychology and a postdoctoral degree in psychoanalysis, and he was Black. But these people, their parents had a high school education, but I wasn't good enough sometimes to come to their houses because I was a person of color. So I was looking at, how race and class are combined in people's minds, but the truth is much more complex than that. Everybody Black is not from the low socioeconomic class, and everybody white is not wealthy. It's a strata.
Right. And even the conversation around skin complexion, it pushes back against these narratives where folks believe that because someone is maybe of light complexion, that it's an automatic entrance into society with white people. And I think that is also something that stands out for me in reading. I didn't get a chance to read your book yet, but just reading the acknowledgments, reading summaries of the book, that this conversation about class, but also acknowledging that being light skinned isn't what you think it is.
Right. I think it's both. So I do think that in my life, I do think that my parents did have some advantage in being light-skinned people who were very attractive. I think that definitely did work in their favor, but it didn't mean no racism. It doesn't mean that just because you're light-skinned and people might be curious about you and welcome you into their world, that it stops there. There's still microaggressions, there's still condescension, there's still things you won't get invited to because you're not white. There's all, there's so much complexity.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you're even saying that it may be with the people that are allowing you in this space may still create microaggressions or just an existence where you're reminded that you are not good enough to really be among us. That's interesting. Yeah, I can't say that I've read anything about that experience in that kind of way. And you say that it's the book is marketed as being this collection of stories, but you say that it's based on your childhood. So tell me a little bit about this decision to have it be pieces of short fiction. Are they interrelated? How do they interact with each other?
They are interrelated. So I went to graduate school in 2000. I began in 2006 and I finished in 2008. And during my time in school, our mentors exposed us to lots of different kinds of fiction. And a couple of the collections that I read inspired me. So one of them was The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fist Fight in Heaven, which was about these kids on a reservation. And it kind of tracks those kids over a period of time. And that seemed doable to me because I had a lot of memories from my childhood. And it was always something that was in the back of my mind. I wasn't sure if I wanted to write a memoir, if I wanted to write a novel, but I liked the idea of short pieces because I was using my memories of events to create these stories. So I didn't have like one long narrative arc of things that I could remember because the stories start really before I was born. So based on stories that I heard from my father or my sister. I was piecing together these short narratives. And then also, I didn't think that I could do it as memoir because there were certain things I wasn't privy to that I just heard secondhand. There were conversations, of course, I would have to invent. I could only sort of approximate and imagine. So I always figured they would end up as fiction. I tried briefly to do it as memoir, and I just couldn't do it because I felt bound by the facts. And also, my mother has a very distinct way of speaking, and she's very funny, but she sometimes speaks in cliches, and I didn't want to write in cliches. So I wanted the freedom to be able to change the things that she said and the way that she talked. So there was a period where the book was a novel, and that wasn't my choice. I was working with somebody who was hoping to sell the book as a novel and felt that the collection already had the feel of a novel, and that there were some things that we could do to round it out and make it even more linked. And so we did try that, and it went out as a novel, and it didn't sell.
Oh, wow.
And so when it didn't sell, I decided to take charge myself, and I pulled out half of the book because I won the Flannery O'Connor Award. And in order to submit to the Flannery O'Connor Award, the word count limit was 75,000 words. My book, when it was a novel, was almost 150,000 words.
Oh, wow.
So literally, I had to strip out half the book. And so I prioritized the character Maddie, who's based on me, and sort of tried to limit the stories to mostly her. It's mostly her, Phil, and Velma, myself, based on me and my parents.
Okay.
And but there were stories from neighbors' points of view, and my sister's point of view, and grandmother's point of view, and those all came out. I hope to publish them separately elsewhere.
Wow. I didn't even realize that was a thing that you could do. So the book was actually published through a publishing company as a novel. And
it wasn't published.
Oh, got you.
No,
when you say sent out, you meant sent out
as a novel, okay. And it didn't sell to a publishing company.
Got you. That's
when it failed to sell, I took it back, I re-edited it, stripped out.
That's so awesome.
And I submitted it to the Flannery O'Connor Award myself. Yes. And the company that publishes the Flannery O'Connor Award-winning books is UGA Press, the University of Georgia Press.
Right, gotcha.
And Roxane Gay was the judge and the editor.
I love that story. I think that story in itself is inspirational to writers who are frustrated with the process and can see that, I love that story just in so many ways, because it's about you taking ownership of that process and saying, look, this is what I'm going to do. Yes. But it's also not sticking to, okay, the format was a novel, it can change. So being flexible. And also the hardest thing. So my experience as being an editor, the hardest thing is having that conversation with writers about their creative babies and taking things out of a book. So that to know that you whittled down a book from 150,000 words to 75,000 in itself is a testament to, I know that was hard. I know. And even as you speak that you want to have life for them in another format, but
because there's a bunch of other stories that are written. Some of them have been published, and some of them I think still need work. And so I'm glad that they didn't go out and get published, because I don't think they were ready. But some of them are good, and they were ready. And I would love for those to have another life in addition. They were published online. I would love for those to be published, in a print collection. That would be fantastic.
I love that. I know when reading about this book, Light Skin Gone to Waste, I'm really curious if you could tell us a little bit about the title without giving too much away about the story.
I don't mind. It doesn't. So the line actually comes from the title of one of the stories, and there's a point in the book where Maddie, who has long hair, and she lives in this white community, and she has been for years trying to make her hair look like white girl's hair. So she blow dries it, she does with a curling iron, she burns her head, she breaks off her hair. And there, because she's light-skinned, there are people in her milieu who don't realize that she's Black all the time. And that isn't exactly what she wants. She wants to fit in, but she doesn't want to not be who she is. And so at some point she has her hair all cut off. She wants a short curly afro so that there's no confusion or question that she is Black. This is how she wants to present. But family members who think it's great to have light skin, they may be color prejudice, look at her and feel like, why did she do that? So now she's just made herself look like everybody else, and they think it's a negative. And one of her aunts says that now her light skin's gone to waste. And so that's one of the ways the phrase is used, that like a light skinned person who has African textured hair. There's another way to use it is to just say a light skinned person who has messed up. And so they've wasted their light skin privilege because they've acted a fool. That's another way. But I'm also looking at different thematic ways that light skin has gone to waste in this story with the characters. So one character was born biracial, but she's given away she's abandoned by her parents. Another character as a child was light skinned and his brother was as brown as he was light. And the light-skinned mother favored the brown child because she felt his life would be more difficult and she wanted to bolster his self-esteem, and kind of left the light-skinned child to fend for himself. And that child suffered for that. So that's another way. And then also just this light-skinned family comes into this white world, and the patriarch thinks that this is going to be this great life. We're going to live, exactly like white people. We're going to have everything they have. And he sleeps with the white wives of white men in the town. But that isn't, that from my point of view, that's not a great thing. And so like this assimilation that they think is going to be so great, it's at the cost of their soul, basically. So it's just looking at multiple ways to play with the title Light Skin Gone to Waste. You can look at a variety of the stories and say, that's an example, and that's an example.
I love it. How many stories are in the collection?
I don't remember. I think it's 10 or 11.
Okay, wow.
There were 17, so I knew that number. when it went out as a novel, there were 17 distinct stories, but I can look and see. So I don't want to, okay, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 10.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So do we see a trajectory of the main character who's based on you moving from childhood to adulthood?
Yes and no. So the body of the stories take place between 1962, before she's born, and the mid 70s when she's a teenager, and that's the bulk of it. And then the book, the last story, jumps in time forward, and she is an adult, and she's narrating about being in her 20s and then projecting forward into her 40s, and we kind of see how she's come full circle. There's a wound that occurs early in the book, in the first Maddie story. Her best friend is a white boy who lives across the street. They're really close. They grow up from babies playing together, and they don't really understand race when they're little babies. And she's light-skinned, so they play with crayons, and she's a tan crayon, but he's confused and like, what, you always have a tan? And it isn't until these racist bullies call her the N-word that her friend realizes, we're different. You're one of them. You're not like me. And it destroys their friendship. And so the last story reunites those two characters. And Maddie's character is still hurt by it, but she's projecting ahead to when she'll not necessarily forgive, but still be able to embrace the early love that they had between them that was pure. When they just played, they were just friends. It wasn't about race. It was just, they enjoyed each other's company. And then society came in and messed everything up. And she realizes that adult that she's run into still has that little boy in him. And he remembers the young version of her, and he still loves that version. She's not there yet, but she imagines that in the future, she'll be able to give him grace, to be kinder to him. When she runs into him in her 20s, she's like, she's not feeling him. She's not warm. She's not friendly. But then she looks back and she tries to open her heart a little bit to that child. So people have asked me, did she forgive him? And I can't say that forgive is actually the right word. It's just understanding and acceptance and care for who the genuine, authentic person was. But it doesn't mean that the wounds that were inflicted don't still hurt.
Right. And do you say this as talking about the character, or as being that she's based on you? Is this something that you yourself have had to process with, from having this situation or a situation similar to it happen?
Yeah, I have had periods where I've worked on myself spiritually and felt like I was possibly able to just forgive and let it go. But this is the world we live in. This is the country we live in. And so those wounds are reopened. Yeah. If anything reopened these old wounds that I had from racist abuse as a child, it was Trump.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Stuff. And the people that I grew up with and went to high school with, some of those people, I would say half of those people, were Trump supporters.
Yeah.
And that was painful to me. Even friends, like even people, like a friend that I had from nursery school, Trump supporter. And it was hard for me to look at my friendship in the same way. Like, how can you support somebody like that who is so hateful and clearly hates me? How can you support someone like that and have me trust you as a friend? And so I just think life has cycles, and there are periods where, there are halcyon times of peace and, letting things go. And then something happens and you're like, no, it's still the same.
Right.
It hasn't changed. Those thought processes, those racist ideas are still with us.
Right.
So
just the timeliness of this piece, that was one of the questions that I have for you. Is this, our recent times, have they opened up wounds? Have they made you remember or think about things to make this story even more, resonant for you and for, I'm sure for your readers it will be. My question then is, because you're a multidisciplinary artist, you write for different genres, is this book, do you see this book moving along the lines of maybe moving into a film or television format? Do you have those types of goals for it right now, so soon upon its release?
I can't say that those are tangible goals, but I certainly hope for it. I would love, so there's multiple stories, so I'm not sure about the whole book being turned into a film or television project, but there has been interest in a story based on the Phil character, who's the father, because he's kind of like, he represents the Mad Men era, but he's Black. And so he's this highly educated African-American man, mid-century, who does everything that white people do. He skis in Switzerland. He has affairs with white women. He has an office on Lower Fifth Avenue in the Village. He lives a very sophisticated, upscale life and does not feel that he has to relegate himself to Black-only experiences. and love that or hate that, it's interesting. And, you know, so personally, like me, I as myself, as his daughter, would have preferred to have had social experiences in Black only spaces. I did not have that except for with family. But so I wasn't in Jack and Jill. My father wasn't in the Boulé. We weren't in any of those Black elite organizations. And in fact, my father didn't like them because he didn't grow up in that culture. He grew up with working class parents. His father had a year of college and was a civil servant and was financially well off, but didn't have an elite education or even a full college education. And my father felt dismissed by that crowd. And so he rejected it on my behalf too, unfortunately. And I would have appreciated maybe I would have liked the opportunity to decide for myself, do I like this or not? And I had cousins in Jack and Jill, and I was insanely jealous because it seemed like they had so much fun and they did really exciting things and they were really smart and they were all friends, like family. And I would have loved that. But so anyway, there is some interest in a story based on that character. And so the other characters would certainly come into play, but my approach in the book prioritized Maddie, and the interest that I'm hearing prioritizes Phil and his experience. He's the adult, he's the, what's the bon vivant with the fabulous life, being a Black man in these spaces. So that's, at this point, maybe more interesting to some people. So I would love it if that would turn into television or film. I would be thrilled for that. But my interest is actually more focused now on getting this out and then the next, creating the next piece, creating the next book and the next book after that. I'm not getting any younger. I want to complete, a wider body of work. So this is my third book. Okay. My second book was one of those stories that was pulled out of the original version of this book. It was a novella, and it was the last story in the book. And that's Maddie in her 40s. Okay. So you had been working on these pieces for a while. So this wasn't something. Yeah. Wow. Years. Yeah. So I started it. Light Skin Gone to Waste was actually my thesis project for my MFA at Antioch University. Wow. So it was only about 5 or 6 stories, but that was the title. And the stories were, I think, almost all Maddie's. So I also, the subtitle for it was the Maddie stories. It was later that I started introducing these other points of view outside of Maddie. So would you say that it's been at least 10 years that you? Wow. Yeah, I graduated from Antioch in December of 2008. Oh, wow. And I already had 5 or 6 of these stories. Right. The beginnings of them, they've evolved, they've changed over time. But I knew even then that I wanted to do this collection. And I wrote another book. So when I came out of school, I wrote a different book. So my first book, Remedy for a Broken Angel, was also something that I had worked on a little bit in school, but that had gone out previously with an agent and didn't sell. That's why I went to graduate school. Because really? I wasn't able to sell that book. And I was like, you know what, maybe it's arrogant of me to think that just because I write screenplays, I'm a novelist. Right. So I was like, maybe you need to learn the craft and the art of fiction. So that's what I spent those years studying, and I'm still studying that. Yeah. I don't think it ends. I don't feel like I know everything. and you say this even as a professor yourself, that you teach or have taught. Yeah, but I do. I don't know. I guess I think that also comes from my acting background. I mean, I was at the Actors Studio in the mid 80s. Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward were there working. They were working on their craft. Like, right. It doesn't end. I agree. The building of your artistry doesn't end just because you arrive at one place. You're always striving to get better. And frankly, I have some students that, in my opinion, are gifted, talented writers as good, if not better than me.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't know certain technical things. But I can't, they're already really good writers. They don't know how to punctuate properly. They don't know how to place dialogue on the page properly with attribution correctly and gesture.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just technical stuff.
Right.
That's stuff they don't really need me to teach them. They could find that on a YouTube tutorial.
Wow.
But I feel like we're colleagues. In graduate school, a lot of times I just feel like I'm working with colleagues that are basically almost at my level or at my level, and I'm just helping them to improve small things and giving them suggestions. But I can use those same suggestions from my own colleagues, what's a better metaphor here or things like that.
I have never heard such graciousness and humbleness, I will admit, to someone who has had so much experience, and for you to have such care and grace about the fact that you are still learning and growing, and that you don't look at it there being a certain endpoint. You just are really committed to the growth and to, creating quality output. I just think that, I've been taking mental notes of all of your inspirational hits throughout this talk, but I think that right there is the most inspirational, because I think that people, when they listen to these conversations with people who have published book, who have a body of work, for you to still look at your body of work, which is so impressive, and it has been continuous, and for you to still say that you're working on your craft, to know that you participated in one of our workshops last year with this body of work, I think that right there is something to model, and that's a piece of knowledge that we don't really get all the time.
Well, thank you. I'll share one thing. Roxane Gay humbled me in her notes. She's like, you have some writer's tics. And then she said, we all have them. But she pointed out, some of my tics, and she was right. When you say writer's tics, can you let the audience know what you mean? Sure. So one of my writer's tics is in dialogue. A lot of times I would have characters begin sentences with well or so. And I hear that all the time. So after she gave me that note, I pulled out a lot of my wells and so's, but then I was watching TV and in dialogue, like on shows, that's how people talk. They say, well, so what are you doing today? Or so, well, I don't, so I did remove a lot of them, but not every single one. But it is a tic, and it comes from writing dialogue. But that's not necessarily the best approach to fiction. And if the well or the so isn't necessary, then it can probably go. There are some times when, if I read it back to myself and I see those words in there and I take them out and it just doesn't flow right for me, then I might stick one back in here and there.
Right.
Sometimes you just need a well or a
so. Right. I think mine is wait, what?
But I didn't realize I did it so much. And she was like, you have like hundreds of them in here. So we all can use another eye, and we can all improve, I think, upon something. And the editing process teaches you that, I think.
Right. And I like how you've grown from that, and you've really, even as I listen to you talk about growing up in the community that you wish that you had as growing up, I love learning and hearing the community that you've created for yourself now as a writer. And so you're in these spaces that you wish that you had been as a young person. You've made that possible for yourself now.
I also chose to move to a Black community. I bought a house in South LA in 2003, and I always thought, I'll fix it up and sell it, and I just haven't left. So I like living, I had never had the opportunity to live in a Black neighborhood, and I like it. I feel at home here. I like my neighbors. I have good relationships with my neighbors. I have invested in the community. I've planted trees here, and I've just become part of this community. So I've been here now like almost 20 years.
Almost 20 years.
I've lived here longer than I've lived anywhere, which is crazy to me, because I'm from such a different world. But I always had, experience with Black communities, because my grandparents lived in Harlem. my father's mother lived in the Bronx. My cousins, some of them still live in the Bronx. Other cousins lived in Hollis, Queens. So I always had an opportunity to experience those neighborhoods, but I had never lived in one myself, and I like it.
Yeah, and you're from the East Coast, so you're in New York.
Yeah, upstate New York.
A transplant now. You're West Coast now. 20 years. That's hometown.
I've been here entirely 30 years.
Wow.
Because I first came out here and lived in the Valley, and then I lived in Beverly Hills, adjacent the slums of Beverly Hills, for 10 years, and then I bought this house.
Oh, wonderful. I appreciate this conversation that we've had today, because it really speaks to we say it, and we know that all Black people are not the same, that we are not a monolith. But I think that you so deeply illustrate the dimension and the fact that when we even are talking about culture, like how the cultural differences that exist due to class, due to location, due to choices, that parenting choices that are made in terms of where we are navigating spaces or even building community. And so I'm looking so forward to reading your book. I want you to end us with telling us where you'd like for folks to go to purchase your book and where they can find you online.
Sure. Well, one of the places I'd love for you to purchase it from is the Center for Fiction on, if you just Google the Center for Fiction. I have an event there on November 10th, and there's a live stream option. It's in Brooklyn, but you can watch it from anywhere. But if you purchase the book, it comes with the live stream option.
Okay.
And you can also live stream it without purchasing the book. But I'd love if you would purchase the book from there or from Skylight Books in Los Angeles. But it's available at most online booksellers and through UGA Press.
Oh,
so you
wonderful.
can also just buy it directly from the publisher. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org, any number of online book retailers.
And tell me this, do you have an online presence? Can they reach out to you on IG or Twitter? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so on Instagram, I'm Tree Lady Toni Ann. Remember I told you I planted trees here? Like I really planted trees here. Tree Lady, TreeLady ToniAnn. That's my Instagram. I'm on Twitter at Toni Ann Johnson. And I also have a Facebook author page, Toni Ann Johnson author. So they can follow me any of those places.
That's fantastic. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to follow you today. But I just want
you back.
Yay! But I want to thank you, Toni, and thank you so much for talking with me. Thank you for sharing your story. I didn't get to ask all my Ruby Bridges questions, but the one question that I did have, you answered, and I'm so proud of you and happy for you, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being on this podcast. I've listened to a few of your podcasts and I really enjoy them. You do a great job with it.
Oh, thank you so much. And and the Herschel Wright Foundation thanks you. And we're just so happy that you are one of our fellows. And I wish you the best with this book. Take care.
Thank you. You too. Bye.